You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Hello, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7, WOKI. We're going to talk about health today. You know, the number 2 killer, I think, in the United States is cancer. And 1 in 4 people will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. And the question is, how do you move forward after a cancer diagnosis? How can you support a loved one going through months of treatment? What information do you listen to? You know, managing a cancer diagnosis is not only managing the disease, it's also taking care of your finances and workplace, making sure you are legally protected, and that you can manage all the complications and emergencies that arise. Our guest today is physician and author Dr. Kerry Forrestal. Dr. Forrestal is the author of the book Crushing Cancer, and this book focuses on practical advice on how to navigate a diagnosis, treatment options, and the journey that follows. What about when people say things to you that really are bad things? And what about when people say things to you that are very, very encouraging and uplifting? So Dr. Forrestal is a practicing physician, actually in emergency medicine, with a medical degree from Stony Brook University, and he holds an MBA, and he served in the Air National Guard. Dr. Forrestal, welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan.
Hello, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you on. By the way, thank you for, pardon me?
Oh, I was going to say thank you so much for that. Your very, very excellent introduction. You really nailed what the book is all about.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, and by the way, thank you for your service. It's not often we have a guy that wrote a cancer book and is an ER doctor and is an MBA and served in the Air National Guard. So thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
Along those lines, talk a little bit about your journey to becoming a physician.
So I started actually in the ambulances in the 1970s, late 1970s. So my mother actually had been a ambulance driver, and it looked really cool running out the door. In those days, we didn't have pagers. You had to wait by the phone. Phone would ring. They'd say, yeah, you need to go to the ambulance barn. And she'd go trucking out the door at all sorts of hours and come back with all sorts of cool stories. So that, of course, for a 16-year-old boy, was like, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. So it was an American Legion ambulance. So they were not adverse to having a 16-year-old running around on the ambulances at dark 30. They were like, at 16, I was getting ready to go kill Nazis. So yeah, sure, you can do this. So I started on the ambulance at 16 years old. December 24th, actually, Christmas Eve was my first set of calls. And just kind of it grew from there. I got through went through undergraduate, wandered the world for a while, joined the Air National Guard, ran a marketing business, worked on Wall Street, did a whale and seal stranding team for a while, and then just decided this was really what I wanted to do. Went back to Stony Brook, took the medical degree, got into Jefferson in Philadelphia, and finished my residency. And I've been in ER trauma centers for the last 2 years, something like that. So, and that's how that came about.
So you're an ER doctor by practice, not a cancer doc. But I guess
Correct.
You end up being the first line of defense when a patient experiences side effects outside of normal business hours. So what prompted you to write a book on cancer? And as I mentioned, it's about how to handle cancer, what things mean. It's very, very plain English. But before we get to all that, what prompted you to write a book on cancer?
It's a question I get a lot as an ER doctor. What are you doing over in Arlene? And it's threefold. The first is we diagnose a lot of it. People come in with a cough, we take the chest x-ray, and there's the lesion in the chest. And it's never really sat right with me. You want to help people. And, cancer care is long and complicated. It doesn't take place. Most of emergency medicine takes place in minutes, maybe hours, sometimes seconds. Cancer care is months and years. So, it's outside of our way of thinking. But, it doesn't sit right to send a guy out the door and say, yeah, you got this problem. Good luck. So I wanted to do something more. I was looking for a resource that I could direct my patients to, and say, okay, this is what you have coming at you. And I couldn't find it, so I wrote it. I've written other things before. I've written a play with a friend. I've also written a science fiction book. But this is my first work of nonfiction. The second thing is, where's the first place you go when something goes wrong? You go to the ER. And some of the things are avoidable. If you knew what to do or what to look for, you can stay out of the ER. And the last place somebody who's undergoing chemotherapy and cancer care needs to be is in an ER. It is a petri dish in there. So, if you didn't have the flu when you came in, you might have it when you go out. And then finally, it's the thing that gets my family. We don't have heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, any of it, but we have cancer. So multiple members of my family, my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom, my dad, none in our generation yet, knock wood, have had it. But, and really the care has gotten so much better where, my mom had lung cancer 3 times and she passed last year of something unrelated to it. My dad had skin cancer multiple times and he died at 100. So our treatment is getting so much better. The only one who's passed of it was my father, or rather my grandfather, in 1971 when there really wasn't any treatment. So he survived World War I, World War II, both theaters in Korea, and he died of bladder cancer. So those are the 3 reasons.
That's a very powerful journey. I'm looking at your book here, Dr. Forrestal, and, the chapter number 1 is about beginning the fight, a checklist. Chapter number 2, the title of it caught my attention. What is cancer? That's the name of the chapter. So I want to ask you, what exactly is cancer?
So cancer, we all think of cancer as a single thing, and it's not. It's a bunch of different diseases that have the commonality of having uncontrolled growth that damages us. So lung cancer, but they all kind of come to the same point, where you're having this uncontrolled growth of cells that do you no good, take away nutrition, and harm structures in our body. And that's kind of the process that we call cancer. So there are lots of different causes of it. Some are viral. For example, HPV is known to cause cervical cancer. We can vaccinate now for HPV, and we actually have vaccine that prevents cancers. And it's been very, very successful. We've seen dramatic drops in cervical cancer. Others are toxins. When people smoke cigarettes, there's I forget what the number was off the top of my head. It's a little early, but there are multiple carcinogens, cancer-causing agents in every draw off of a cigarette. So there are a lot of different reasons why our cellular machinery kind of breaks and starts growing, but that's the commonality of it. Cancer is uncontrolled cell growth.
Right. So I've heard, hey, we all have cancer cells in the body, and you say I guess those cells keep growing. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? I mean, I know in the book you mentioned, when we're growing in our young years, we get to a certain age, we stop growing in height. And Correct. You use that analogy. So is that kind of what's going on with cancer cells? Is they just keep growing and we have to?
Yep, that's exactly
right. So that's
right.
what actually happens.
So for your listeners, I would say, if you take your hands and you put them together, palm to palm, like a prayer, right? You notice that the fingers are the same size, right? All of your fingers are the same size. Palm is roughly the same size. Your arms, generally, if you stick them straight out, are the same size. So your body has the off switch to say, okay, we're grown enough. That's all we need to do. We're in good shape here. And when those signals get broken, either through inflammation, viral infection, or whatever, that's when you get the cancerous growth.
But now, what about, like, I know a very, very good friend, and her dad never smoked a cigarette in his day as his life and was not around smoke a lot, and he got lung cancer unexpectedly and passed away from it. So that's I guess you mentioned viral and inflammation, but sometimes these things aren't that easily explainable, right?
Yep, we're better and better at figuring out what breaks in what particular type of cancer, but there are some that just come out of nowhere. We go, whoa, wait, there's a thing called BRCA, which is a breast cancer gene. It's literally breast, BR, cancer, CA, BRCA. And if you have this, you've got an 80% chance of having breast cancer and a 60% chance of having ovarian cancer. But there are lots of other causes for these cancers. So your friend, I'm sorry to hear that they passed of lung cancer, but it may have been a viral infection. It could have been, what was his occupation?
I guess I'm not sure about that. It was my friend's father.
There you go. Sometimes
and this was several years ago.
Things. Yeah, we've had we know another problem with smoking is COPD, but we get people who have never smoked a cigarette in their life and never been around secondhand smoke who come up with COPD for other reasons. So yeah, it's not a one size fits all. There's still stuff we're learning. I mean, research is the critical part of all this. Every day we have all these amazing researchers just banging away at test tubes and on lab benches, getting closer and closer to finding out what other things we have to worry about. We've got a very complex environment now. We've got the forever chemicals that people talk about. Microplastics are all over the place. They're actually finding microplastics in placentas of newborns. So we've got, plastic in the body is not supposed to be there. It's going to cause inflammation. And there you've just come into that route of causing rapid cell turnover. The more times, we use the analogy in the book, the more copies you make of something, the more likely it is not to look like the original. You get these things creep in, and they're, most of the time it causes cell death, but sometimes it can cause this uncontrolled growth. So, it is it's a subject of a lot of research, and right now, they're dialing back the research at NIH, and that's going to be problematic. So, but we'll keep at it.
We're visiting with Dr. Kerry Forrestal, and he is author of the book Crushing Cancer. He's an emergency physician. When we come back, that kind of leads into, I want to ask you some questions about nature versus nurture. Later in the show, we're going to get into treatment modalities, alternatives, complementary medicine, what's the difference in all those things, and then how do we manage a diagnosis like this. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan, and we're visiting with Dr. Kerry Forrestal, who has written a fantastic book several years ago, Crushing Cancer. And we're talking, he's an emergency physician who deals with a lot of cancer patients, as you can imagine, that come into the ER. And so we're talking about how to handle this kind of a diagnosis, the different things that go into that. We're going to talk about treatment modalities, much, much more stuff. So, Dr. Forrestal, I mentioned nature versus nurture. You mentioned, there's our environment. We talked about plastics. You mentioned smoke, our diets. I don't know how clean our diets are in the U.S., probably not very clean. I know when I go to foreign countries, there's an awful lot of things that they cannot use in foreign countries that we're allowed to use here. Now, then you also mentioned the BRCA gene. So talk a little bit about nature versus nurture, and how much does our environment impact this?
So, yeah, we're seeing rates of cancer go up in young people, and the research they're doing right now is trying to determine how much of this is being driven by our environment. You're right. We have the American diet is not great. We tend to process foods as opposed to fresh foods. But to go back, so nature versus nurture, this would be a great way to kind of conceptualize it. If you have a pile of leaves in your yard, right? There's no problem. You've got a pile of leaves. But if you throw a match in there, then you've got a bonfire and you got to do something with put it out, or hopefully, it doesn't cause any damage. And that's what cancer is. You can have the predisposition to having cancer, but you got to have the spark. You got to have the match to set it off. So that's nature versus nurture. It's both. So we live in an increasingly toxified environment. The rise of plastics, we look at our world, but if you go back 100 years, plastics didn't really exist. There might have been some, chemist somewhere, cooking this up, but it really hasn't started. Now, you can't get away from plastics no matter what you do. It's just a throwaway society where we're throwing all this junk into our environment and then kind of scratching our heads why our environment's kind of hurting us. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's some of it is even just diet related. We know that increased alcohol use leads to stomach problems, cancers, pancreatic issues. So, yeah, the nature versus nurture, it's both. And our environment is toxifying. I've traveled abroad, too, and I know exactly what you're talking about. You go over there, the foods are just better. They're fresher. They're not, you're not eating nothing but processed food. So, but
yeah, we went. So my daughter lived in New Zealand for 2 years, and she just moved back home. And we would go over there to visit her, and we went for like 2 weeks over the New Year, which is their summer, like a couple of years ago. And we didn't worry about what we ate while we were there. We just enjoyed it, and we both lost weight. And I was like, what in the world? Just fresher ingredients, all those things. Now, I do want to ask you particularly, you mentioned inflammation. And I want to ask you particularly about sugar, because I've heard different doctors sometimes say sugar can be a feeder of cancer. Is that true?
Well, if you think about what cancer is, as we go back to our definition of uncontrolled cell growth, we use sugar as our fuel for all cells. So we metabolically, that is what we rely on. So more sugar is more fuel for cancer cells. There is a research being done on a approach to cancer care where you reduce your sugar intake after chemotherapy, and that's one I'm not as familiar with. I'm actually doing research on that for the new book. We were signed for a second edition with Springer Publishing, but yeah, I mean, sugar is not itself pro-inflammatory, but it does feed cells. That if cells are rapidly growing, they're going to preferentially suck up all the glucose, fructose, sucrose, all of those things. So, yeah, it helps. It promotes cancer growth, but is not cancerous in and of itself.
Okay, well, that's a great answer. I mean, that means, we know sugar causes so many other things, too. We need to be careful with our sugar intake, and all the processed foods and the plastics and all that stuff. Yeah. Let's talk about the stages. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Forrestal.
Oh, I was just going to say, with the weight loss that you were talking about, we pack our food full of fat and salt because that's what tastes good to us. They know that's what's going to get us to eat more. And like I said, we are looking at some of the things in processed foods that may be pro-cancerous. So, yeah, for your listeners, one of the strategies you can use is shop around the outside of most stores. If you think about how a store is laid out, the processed stuff is in the middle, the chips and the nonsense.
Right.
But if you go around the outside, you got meat, dairy, fruit, produce. So, shop around the outside and only go to the inside for your coffee. I would never deny anybody their coffee.
Sure. Let's talk about when somebody receives a diagnosis. We know the C word is a dreaded word. We know there's various stages. Cancers get detected at various stages. The first thing I want to ask is, in your book, you say the stage of your cancer only talks about the cancer, but not the patient. Talk about the stages of cancer and the important quote there of it's the cancer, not the patient.
So everybody, when you get that diagnosis, they say cancer, your whole world goes topsy-turvy. People have described it as my brother-in-law had prostate cancer, and he described it when the doctor kept talking. It was like Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. He heard nothing after he said you have prostate cancer. So when you get that diagnosis, first thing people do is they immediately run to the internet and they say, I have prostate cancer. What are my chances? And that's the worst thing
you go down those rabbit holes, it's awfully scary.
Yeah. So now the number is a research number. The number is a number that scientists use to say, if I take treatment A, I give a guy 5 years. If I give treatment B, I give a person 6 years. Okay, then treatment B is better. It's a scientific research number that people are using to handicap themselves. That number is all comers. So when we talk about prostate cancer, I mean, we do very well with prostate cancer. But that number is really all comers. It's everybody who gets diagnosed. So you're talking about the 90-year-old guy who's not going to bother treating it. You're talking about the guy who won't comply with care. You're talking about the guy who has 14 comorbidities, weighs 400 pounds, and has no intention of changing what he does, even though he's in therapy. You're talking about the guys who don't have access to care. It's unfortunate in the United States that we have a very spotty healthcare system. If you live near a cancer center, if you live someplace, then you have better chance of completing care. But there are enormous care deserts out there. There are places where you just can't get the medical care that you need. There are insurance companies that stand in the way. You know, I have one gentleman I met, Owen Stevens, who's a guy who actually designs for Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, he's an interesting character. And they gave him a terrible time. You know, his doctor said, this is the chemo that you need, and this is how we're going to beat this thing. And the insurance company went, nah, I'm not feeling it. Do something else. You know, so it really it jammed him up pretty good. It is crazy, right? The healthcare, any healthcare insurer does anything other than pay the bills. They direct care now. And I don't know how we got into this position where a healthcare insurer can say, meh, you know, I don't have to deal with it as much on my end because of medical emergencies are generally like, do what you got to do. But people wind up in my emergency department weekly, if not daily, because of complications from their insurer saying, oh, that medicine that worked for you forever, you can't have it anymore. Or, you know, we just can't approve this, that, or the other thing. And we have a huge volume of people, you know, coming through the emergency department. If you ever want to have me on again to talk about ER crowding, oh, we could talk for ages. But
you know what? I'd love to do that. We'll do that maybe this fall.
That's great. The thing, though, is that number, people do not come with a expiration date. You are an individual. Your cancer is individual to you. And with the tools that we have, you had gone back the dreaded word, and that's how we look at it. And one of the messages of the book is to say, you know what? We are beating this thing now more often than not. In a lot of them, like thyroid cancer, 97% cure rate, early stage breast cancers, and now getting later with breast cancers. We live in this amazing new age, right? There have been 4 ages. I talk about this a bit in the book. There are 4 ages of cancer care, right? First was surgery, right? This is going back to the Egyptians. There's something called the Fire Scroll or whatever it was that talks about surgery for cancer. Then we fast forward to Marie Curie doing her thing, and we have radiation therapy. They actually had somebody strapped a piece of radium onto a growth on their skin, and it went away. First cure from radiation therapy. Obviously, we've gotten a lot better than strapping things to cancers, but even my own grandmother, she had uterine cancer, and the treatment at that point, remember this is 1930s to 40s, was to pack her uterus with radium pellets and hope for the best, you know, and it worked. Then we come forward to Sidney Farber in the 1940s to 50s, and we have chemotherapy, right? Those are the 3 that we've all known. But now we have immunotherapy, where we're actually taking out your T cells. It's a type of white blood cell count. We're training them how to go after the cancer cells, and then we're putting them back into you, and they wipe out the cancer cells. And then it leaves you with an immunity. It leaves you with that immunological memory where if this thing shows up again, which it sometimes does, you've already got built-in therapy. You know, we've got checkpoint inhibitor, we've got all these amazing things, and they're just getting going. We talked a little bit about research before. The NIH just got slashed by a third, or is about to get slashed by a third. And it's such a critical time that we are on the cusp of making cancer just an annoyance. You know, say, oh, yeah, I got cancer. All right, I got to go get some immunotherapy, and then I'll get this thing fixed out. And we're right at that doorstep. We're seeing they have treated for the first time successfully a brain cancer. I think it was astrocytoma or glio, I forget which. But it was one of the ones where if you get it, you go, okay, I know how this is going to go because we didn't have good therapies. We achieved a cure for something that was almost 100% fatal. So we're right there. We're just on that cusp. In our lifetime, I'm not sure how old you are, but in our lifetime, I'm 61, we're going to see enormous and amazing things. So if there's any message to take from all of that long-winded stuff, is there's every reason to have hope. Don't look at the number and assume that's you. That's your cancer. You have an army of cancer people at your back to fight this.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thanks for tuning in to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way, as you listen to News Talk 98.7 WOKI. And I was going to have my dollars and cents segment here, but I'm not going to do that this week, and the reason is I'm so captivated by this conversation with Dr. Kerry Forrestal about crushing cancer, and I just want all the time for him. I was going to do a segment on why the 60-40 portfolio of stocks and bonds may be very dangerous to your wealth in the future and is not probably a great way to mitigate risk and hasn't been the last 6 years. I'll cover that in my retirement minute this upcoming week, so you can hear that right here on this station. Dr. Forrestal, let's talk about different treatment modalities. First, the things I said going into the break. Now, you mentioned, immunotherapy, which is, I guess you would call that traditional medicine, and there's complementary medicine. Talk about the difference in those two things versus things like alternative medicines and naturopathic medicines.
Okay, so we can break the world up artificially, really, into traditional medicine. These are allopaths like myself, medical doctor, MD, osteopaths, DOs, and we practice a science-based medicine. We work with the research guys to say what is the best way to go about taking care of this particular problem. Complementary medicine are things that are a little outside, but they have still been shown to have some benefit. These would be things like chiropractic, acupuncture, acupressure. These are things that show that they improve a quality of life, at least.
So that sounds like they more treat this. That sounds like they more treat the symptoms.
They will, but a lot of being able to comply with cancer care is being physically well enough to do it. So with acupuncture, for example, people get a lot of discomfort relief, allowing them more mobility, more action, more ability to comply with care. It's hard to get up some mornings after you've been rocked by chemotherapy for a couple of weeks and get out to that next session. If you don't go, you don't treat, the cancer wins. So complementary medicine, the way I phrase it in the book, I think, is to say, okay, if you're going through cancer care and you light a lavender candle and it makes you feel better and you're more able to comply with care and go about your day, that's complementary medicine. If you think the candle is going to cure the cancer, that's alternative medicine. All right? So alternative medicine is not supported by scientific studies that have been validated. So people have this notion that doctors, if it's natural, we don't want anything to do with it. And that is really not the truth. If you come to me and you say, I've got this crushing chest pain, I'm going to go, okay, if this is a heart attack, you're getting aspirin. Aspirin is an extract from a willow tree bark, right? If you come to me with breast cancer, I'm going to say, well, Taxol is probably going to be the stuff we're going to reach in certain cases. It's from a Pacific yew tree. Quinine is an anti-malarial. Erythromycin, penicillin. These are naturally occurring antibiotics. Digitalis, foxglove, used to be used in AFib all the time. So there's this whole section of medicines that are perfectly natural, but they have been vetted. They have been looked at scientifically to say, okay, if I give this guy aspirin and I give this guy not aspirin, who does better? The guy with the aspirin does better. Okay, then that's what we use. There's a great poem that's called Storm, and it's by Tim Minchin, and it has a line in it, and it says, do you know what they call alternative medicine that's been proven to work? Medicine. So
traditional medicine.
Yeah, it is. So the alternative guys, they vary. If you look at the naturopathic schools, it's 100% acceptance rate for some of these places. So it's like the old joke, if you have a pulse and a purse, you can get a degree. And the stuff has not been proven to work and is sometimes quite disastrous. You look at Stephen Jobs, right? He had a slow-growing neuroendocrine type of pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is one of the tough ones. And it's going to sound crazy to say, he got lucky because he had one that is very slow-growing, where pancreatic cancer is usually very aggressive. He had one that was not easily, but it was beatable. And he said, I'm the smartest guy in the world, so I'm going to go over here and meditate, and I'm going to juice, and I'm going to cleanse. And he wasted 9 months or so, and by that time, it was over and done. Then he turned to traditional medicine, and it was just too late to help the man. And he passed. And you think about what he might have contributed to the world had he survived. But, so alternative medicine, again, people say, oh, yeah, my favorite one for alternative medicine, my favorite story, I had a guy come into the ER, and he had an echinacea, it was echinacea tea bag stuck in his nose. I was like, okay, the complaint said headache. So I went, all right, explain it to me. Tell me, why do you have an echinacea tea bag stuck in your nose? He said, well, I read on the internet that it was, the way to get rid of headaches. So how long has that been in there? He goes, well, that's the problem. I can't get it out. It had abscessed and almost went up into his brain. He left it in there because that's what the people say. The people who promise you, these alternate medicine guys, they promise you everything. Here's a way to kind of tease out what might not be to your best interest. The more it promises, the less it does. If you read scientific literature, you'll say, oh, this is correlated, or this suggests, or this. They use very soft words. When a guy says, this is going to cure everything you got, everything from headache to fungus on your toes, it's not going to. It's going to separate you from your money. If you look at
beware when somebody says what your doctors won't tell you.
Oh yes, yeah, that's a key phrase. Absolutely, I agree. If you look at the bottom of any of the alternate medicine things, like on Amazon, it says at the bottom, it goes, this is not a medicine. It says some phrase that's in there. This is not being FDA approved, and it doesn't do anything. You're just getting expensive water.
I do want to ask you a question, though, Dr. Forrestal, because I hear this at times because, the medical business is a big business dollar-wise, and I've had conversations with people. How you mentioned all the promising things that are coming out with treatment protocol for cancer. You actually mentioned the word, we might be in our generation to a point where cancer becomes more of an annoyance as anything else because of the protocol the research we're doing. I've heard some people say we'll never have a cure for cancer. It would cost too much money. It would cost the industry too much money. There's too much. Let me rephrase that. There's too much money in it. How about that?
Yeah, it's always interesting that people think that this is money motivated. Companies and medicine. There's absolutely a business to medicine as long as you have to pay for medical equipment. As long as I have to pay for a tongue depressor and the nurse and all like that, there's going to be a business to medicine. We have to make sure it doesn't become commerce, where we're doing things just to make money. So I've heard that too. It's one of those things where you just kind of shrug your shoulders and you go like, I can only tell you that we got into this to heal people. We got into this, I spent.
That's a great word.
Yeah. I spent, 11 years of my life, good years of my life, and racked up a mortgage worth of debt so that I can step onto the stage and help people. And we make a fair living, and we had to, you got to pay back the bills, and you got to pay your mortgage and raise your kids and all those sorts of things. But you don't show up to work to make the money. You show up to work because this is what it is absolutely, you need to do. It's something that's not done accidentally. You have to really, really hammer at it to get through that. And the structures that we build, are acts of love. They're acts of dedication of lifetimes, and we see right now there are people, NIH is about to lose a bunch. The National Cancer Institute is about to lose a bunch. It'll be like a forest fire it's going to burn away a lot. Maybe we'll repopulate it. Maybe it'll grow back better, but we're going to lose a lot of great research, a lot of great structures. And I'm sorry, I'm wandering off course here, but we don't do it for the money. We do it for the love of the game. And
I think that's absolutely a great word. And that all the doctors that I know, I'm very good friends with several doctors. A cardiologist, I'm pretty good friends with the urologist, a radiation oncologist, somebody who just treats cancer. Several friends, and they're in it for the right reasons and have hearts and great hearts and all those things. And I would think that the typical doctor's in it for the right reasons. I think that's a great word. Before we get to our next break, Dr. Forrestal, you mentioned pancreatic cancer and Steve Jobs, and you mentioned that's the bad, a really bad kind. And then you hear people say, prostate cancer is a good kind, as if there's any kind of good kind of cancer. But does a lot of this come down to when it's diagnosed and the importance of early detection?
Yeah, early detection is everything. It really is. It's if you talk about a stage 1 cancer, if you look at any of them, the percentages are quite high on stage 1, and they fall off by stage 4. So the more that you have to get rid of, the more damage you're going to do to the healthy tissue, and the less likely the patient is to be able to survive it. Early detection, it's nobody's favorite thing to get their prostate examined. Mammograms are uncomfortable. Pap smears are uncomfortable. Colonoscopies are uncomfortable. But if you catch it early, you win. That's the most important thing.
If you have symptoms, go see a doctor, go see your primary care. If necessary, go see a specialist. If you have any kind of symptoms, be very in tune to our bodies, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, don't ignore if you're having any symptom. One of the reasons why pancreatic is such a pain is that we catch it so late. It's in an area that's it doesn't have good innervation. So until somebody, the classic is guy comes in, he goes, I just turned yellow, man. I have no idea what's going on. We call it painless jaundice. And when you see this guy, you go, oh, boy. And there's going to be a mass at the pancreatic head blocking up the bile duct and backing all the bile into the skin. And that's why you're yellow. But, it's we know it. So don't wait, do it on the schedule. So the colonoscopies, they're every 5 years. Sometimes they'll say, if you're in the clear at some point, you go to 10. The mammograms yearly, you do all those things to test. They're coming up now with liquid biopsies. Again, we're talking about research leading the way into the future. They're working on liquid biopsies where they're going to see the fragments of the cancer in blood draws. And you'll be able to test for any number of cancers just by doing blood draws. Right now, obviously, you can test for leukemia and all the blood-borne, or the blood-based cancers by a blood test. But now we're talking about solid tumors. So, like I said, that's going to be an amazing day when you can go and test for, 20 different types of cancer with a blood test. So, we're getting there.
That's Dr. Kerry Forrestal, author of the book Crushing Cancer. He's an emergency physician. When we come back, we are going to dive into handling the other parts that come with this, and specific things that much of which is talked about in his book, the financial implications, the emotional and psychological things. So stay with us. We're visiting with Dr. Kerry Forrestal, only on More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.